Hello there, this is Fiona, host and main GM for What Am I Rolling, a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. This is a bonus Q&A episode to tide us over to the next one-shot, and it is indeed a very special Q&A, as this week I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing Charlie Menzies, the lead designer behind the award-winning tabletop RPG Shiver, a game that lets players bring their favourite scary movies, spooky TV shows, and horror stories to life. Ever wanted to play through the plot of your favourite film on the tabletop? Ever wanted to make sequels, pre-sequels, and original stories in the worlds of pop culture that you love? Well, Shiver lets you play that. Published by Parable Games, Shiver has easy-to-learn rules that make it fast to play and keep players immersed in chaotic and dark magic-filled stories. Shiver uses symbolic dice to keep players engaged in the story, as well as provide a visual role-playing aid that does away with pesky arithmetic. Character creation is easy and quick, with a simple skill point and ability system that links to the game's dice. Shiver is perfect for a one-shot or short story between main campaigns, but it can also be used to form longer narratives, tying one-shot stories together using the rules for sequels. Parable Games' latest funding campaign, Shiver Double Feature, brings 2 new expansions to the core game. In Shiver Blockbuster, players can be movie stars and play out your favourite big-screen hits such as Jurassic Park or Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Whilst in Shiver Slasher, players must try to survive the night in their own horror movie, inspired by such cult classics as Friday the 13th or Halloween. After talking to Charlie about Shiver and these new upcoming expansions, I'm honestly so excited to run this game. I think it's one of the most unique and well-designed RPGs for telling horror stories. I think it's been one of my favourite RPGs to read to date. The funding campaign for Shiver Double Feature is set to go live on October 11th on GameFound, so be sure to check it out there and support it. I'll put links to that and to Parable Games' website on the What Am I Rolling website and in this episode's show notes. Well, let's start then with a really simple, easy question for you. So, who are you and what do you do?
So I'm Charlie Menzies. I'm the lead designer and writer for Shiver RPG. I kind of handle all the writing for the main core book, although now we're bringing more people onto the team, as well as various other bits within Parable Games as well.
So how did you get into writing your own role-playing game, which has very recently won People's Choice for the best RPG at UK Games Expo? Congratulations on that. That's a pretty amazing feat. So how did you get into role-playing and how did you get into writing your own games?
So I've always been into kind of writing since I was quite young, and I kind of went off to university to study film and television with the aim of being a scriptwriter, was actually my kind of main goal. But whilst I was there, made friends with a lot of actors and kind of film people and ended up kind of falling into kind of like a few kind of D&D groups and various other kind of like role-playing groups and had just a whale of a time. For us, we found it was like a really nice way of if you had a high concept idea, which as a student, you'd never have the money to make it as a film, just play it out together and have a load of fun with it. So it was kind of born there. And then after I left university, I moved down to London to kind of work in the film industry. And all of my friends got scattered to the four winds. So I thought, what's a great way to kind of keep everybody together, kind of play some role-playing games. But we kind of realized like one thing started to kind of cause an issue is that a lot of my friends have kind of some form of like dyslexia or dysnumeracy. And so certain systems started to become really, really intimidating. So I thought, you know what? I'll homebrew a system. I'll have a little fun, design some stuff, put it together and play it with my friends. And then that has over time evolved into Shiver. And that's kind of how I kind of got started and how we kind of got to the start of where Shiver is now.
That's such an interesting point, as you say. Like when people think of role-playing games, they instantly think, dice rolling, there's a lot of maths. And like you said, it can be quite intimidating. And yet there is like this now wave of games that are going away from dice mechanics as we used to think of them as like roll a d6, add the numbers, etc. It's now like in Shiver, you have like a customized symbol, which is like you interpret it. So it's not like a binary success or failure or using tokens or even just conversation. And so that's such a cool thing, just a little bit more in terms of accessibility. Hopefully one that people are starting to think more of when they're developing games. But specifically Shiver, as it's sort of given away in the title, it's primarily horror. So are you a big horror fan yourself? Do you like running horror role-playing games? Or is it just like, we'll start there?
Massively. So I became a kind of big horror fan whilst I was at university. Again, I kind of discovered more and more horror films, a kind of massive wealth of kind of foreign cinema that kind of intrigued me as well. And it was very interesting because there was always a small group of us where kind of people were like, horror is trash or horror is not art. And there was a very kind of big resistance to like genre cinema. But for me, I love genre cinema deeply. So I love horror, but I love genre in kind of general. But horror has always been the standout for me. There's something about it in terms of like you're gathering around with a group of people, particularly in the cinema, and you're kind of getting that visceral reaction all together. And I really liked that experience whenever I ran horror games, whether it be ball games or kind of RPG games, where there was this kind of nice visceral reaction from everyone as a group. And I think that's really kind of why I landed on horror so much. It's a genre I have a deep affinity and love for.
That's such a good way of putting it as well, because I guess some people won't get high fantasy, they can't relate to it, and they can't relate to sci-fi, all that sort of thing. But there is something about horror where I think every one of us on a based human instinct level will tap into that, like, ooh, there's definitely that unease and stuff. And yeah, I think you can do so much with the power of words, certainly like describing things, depending on obviously people's sensitivities and sort of boundaries as well. Do you have a particular favorite horror game that's not obviously not Shiver, but is there a particular one that you were running, or like a particular, I guess, genre of horror perhaps that you really liked?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I tend to dabble around with a lot of the different subgenres that I kind of really enjoy. I have a deep affinity for the kind of the classic like Hammer horror films and Universal horror films. And I found, although I played it kind of after kind of starting on the kind of journey with Shiver, Betrayal at House on the Hill, I think has a fantastic way of kind of capturing that beautiful B-movie energy of all these kind of playing all these wonderful little characters and kind of traitors being revealed and you never really, it's sitting down and never really knowing exactly what's going to happen, and that tension as you build the house is fantastic.
Yes.
So I really enjoyed that. Escape the Dark Castle was another one as well. For the sense of collaborative play is one that really shone out to me, of that the rule of like, if one of you dies, you all fail. And there's this constant negotiation and talk around the table about who's taking the next card, who's injured, who has the stale bit of cheese. And I kind of really enjoyed that as well. And in terms of other RPGs, I've always tried to infuse, when I was kind of running D&D, I'd always infuse as much horror as possible. I found as well as a good amount of humor kind of in there too. But Call of Cthulhu, I think as well, is definitely, I've had some great experiences with Call of Cthulhu as well as a horror game.
There's something about Betrayal on House on Hill. I've got it, again, you probably can't see it. There's the board game stack of doom of games I've not played. And yeah, Betrayal is there. But it's one of those ones, again, I never have enough people around to play it. But just reading through the scripts, and every time you play, it's a different story, just depending on what you get as well. So the idea that you could have that trope of a haunted house that you are building together, but then suddenly it changes, and then having that betray mechanic as well it's all of that is like tick tick tick. So to have that in a RPG game as well, let's talk about it then. So what is Shiver, and how does it stand out from other RPGs that are out there?
So Shiver is a horror RPG that allows you to play any pop culture, film, TV, book, anything horror that you've ever kind of seen or enjoyed. You can bring it to life on the tabletop. It's completely setting neutral, which I think is a very unique feature of it. We've designed the rule set so that you can be playing as medieval peasants going up against a demon boar 1 minute, or shooting off into space and like fighting xenomorphs the next. It really lends itself to that kind of one shot, let's play a horror movie night kind of play, I'd say. And I think that makes it kind of very unique, of that it really, really leans into that sense of like getting a cinematic feel around the table. We also have a kind of mechanic called the Doom Clock, which ticks, it's a 60-minute clock, and at 15-minute intervals, generated by failures and rolling strange on your dice, it creates these events that happen in the world, like these big horror movie moments. So I use a slasher movie as an example. So you're a bunch of camp counselors kind of around the campfire. All of a sudden, at 1:15, all the power goes out. 1:30, somebody sabotages the school bus. It's the only vehicle that's going to allow you to get out there. 1:45, camp counselor Kenny gets dragged off screaming into the woods. There's a trail of blood. Never see him again. And at midnight, your slasher, your Jason Voorhees, your Michael Myers, turns up out of the woods and becomes a permanent stalking threat. So it gives this sense of escalating tension. these events that players actually kind of want to uncover but are equally scared of at the same time.
Yeah.
And the big one for me is that every roll has consequence. So if you fail, there is always a chance that you're going to generate doom. Every time you roll, there's a chance you're going to unlock one of these nasty, gribbly events that's going to come after your players. And it means that every roll has inbuilt tension, which I think is just really, really fun for a horror game. And I deviously love watching players sweat every time they roll dice.
It's so true. Like, it's such an interesting mechanic, that idea that every time it's like an extra tick, that whole idea that we're 4 minutes to midnight, all that sort of thing, just into a game. And yeah, I can definitely imagine having players going, well, I need to roll, but we're so close to, if I roll badly, that's it. We're going to tick over into the next quarter as well. And maybe moving on to then the archetypes. You've got all these different archetypes, which are brilliantly, I think, imagined as well. You get like, the warrior, you've got the survivalist, all these sort of very horror tropes, but they connect, like, as you said, it's not necessarily stuck in one particular time period. You can apply it to all these things. But this idea that certain roles maybe unlock powers of, say, the strange archetype, but also you have abilities that can only happen once every quarter of the doom clock or every cycle. And so, yeah, embedding that idea of there's a time pressure or there's like a time limit before something else happens really, for me, adds that idea of like, this is a horror movie. Things are going to happen to you, and it's only a matter of time. You can only you can only hold it back for so long. Because obviously, I know some of the roles and stuff, you can take back some of the clocks, but these precious minutes. But for how long?
We've seen a really interesting thing emerge with our player base. With that, is that we've kind of noticed there are two types of players. There are what we call doom marchers, people who will just aggressively try and tick up the doom clock because they want to see what happens and they enjoy the chaos of it. And doom managers, so the people who are constantly looking for ways to tick back the doom clock and trying to just keep it away from anything happening.
How fascinating.
And usually there's a balance of those players in groups. So then you get wonderful conflict where you have someone who's playing a strange glass canning in it and suddenly the doom clock going wild, and someone desperately trying to almost being like the responsible kind of like carrying adult of like, let's try not to have the horror happen. It's just been a fascinating thing that when we were playtesting, we saw little bits of it, but now it's kind of like, seeing these play styles emerge is just really, really fun.
Yeah, and I guess that it is that sort of, again, watching that horror movie, there's always that one person who goes, look, I'm just going to go check, it's fine. You're like, why do they always play up to these things? But I guess it's just, I don't know, it's just maybe something in players as well, like you said, that idea of like, solid, let's do it and find out. It's going to be great.
That was an initial challenge we put out to players of being like, one of the things that inspired it was horror movies gain a lot of criticism of, there are a lot of people sitting back in their armchairs or on the sofas or in the cinema seats saying, that's a stupid decision. I'd never do that. I'd survive in this situation. And I think Shiver challenges you to, okay, try it. Let's see if you will, because it's really interesting that when players are under pressure and they're under stress and there's a creature coming for them, it's hilarious the amount of times that people make exactly the same questionable decisions as they are in horror movies as they do in the game. And I think it just a natural thing of that. Humans under pressure don't always make the best choices.
Well, a game that makes you think about your own humanity in more ways than one. Oh, I don't know about that. I'm going to take that award back from you. Well, let's talk about the archetypes as well. So there's something about within the way you sort of do character creation, this idea that you have all these different archetypes, which is linked to each one of the key core skills. But also, one thing I really enjoy and that stood out for me is that when you're doing leveling up, per se, you get this idea of like, oh, here's some ability points. If you're starting at level 5, you get 5 ability points. And then you have a tree to gain different skills. And it feels very much like what we've seen in recent like video games as well. Sort of like the ones that always come to mind is Borderlands and Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. And I haven't really seen that much in RPGs. Like, obviously, I know powered by the Apocalypse games, you have your playbook and your moves and stuff, but the idea that you can really customize what your character is. Where did you get that inspiration from? Was it something that you always intended to have as almost like a tree-like progression for the characters?
You hit the nail on the head, exactly. Video games, I'm a big video gamer, as is my brother. And when I started kind of figuring out how to do the ability kind of progression and leveling up, when I started looking more broadly and looking at other RPGs, I was really surprised that there hadn't been this cross dialogue between video games, and you don't really see it as much. Building a tree seemed to be, to me, like an easy way to communicate this. And we found a lot of younger players who've played video games take to the character building like a duck to water, because they build it like they're doing in a video game. But I think also the beauty of trees, I think, is that not only does it make it easy to kind of actually communicate what you're doing with your character and figure it out, it opens up a wealth of actually quite complicated character builds in a really simple format. Because we have a thing in Shiver of like kind of when in our testing phase, when we were describing how players were building characters. So usually what we would do is we would set an ability like level and then just let people go wild in certain trees. And we noticed that players do various different things. So some do what we call build tall. So in the trees in Shiver, like they're usually split into 3. Some are slightly more unique and kind of ebb and flow and rejoin in different points. Or the weird is slightly different of that. They're isolated trees because they're so powerful. Building tall is that basically somebody would pick one path and would just go straight up to the top and get all the abilities and get very, very themey. So like in the warrior, for example, they might pick the berserker, be really good at punching stuff and getting kind of stronger as they take damage. But some people would like to build broad, which we found really interesting, of that they'd go a certain level up, say in berserker, but it'd be like, I'm good with my fists, but I'm a caring character. I like to protect people. And then they go into protect path and get behind me. They want to kind of like fight stuff with their fists, but they want to be shuffling the other characters behind them and look after them. And that's the thing I think I was really enjoying when we were kind of testing it and using those trees, is that people were making a lot of decisions based on character rather than gameplay.
Oh, that's really cool. That's what you want in role-playing games. Like, I know that obviously I too am someone that builds tall in most of my games because I'm like, oh, that's easier. But whereas here, I think I do feel like there's more in terms of like customization. I can be flexible. But you're right. I would definitely think like, what would my character do rather than, oh, this is going to get me the most damage output, is it? I mean, there are people who play RPGs like that, the min maxes and stuff, and that's totally fine. That's how they play. But I think with this sort of the shift again towards more narrative ways of doing storytelling, and certainly for actual players online, and obviously like as you said, like using different kinds of dice mechanics that are a more narrative way of describing what the story is, it makes total sense that you want to give yourselves that options. And that's not even to say that you have to stick to one archetype. I know you say after a certain, I think it's like 5 levels, that you could be like, okay, you can now go into another hybrid archetype. So you can even go into more customization if you're playing several sessions, and that I quite like as well. So that you're not necessarily stuck as the warrior berserker. You can go and become a little bit strange. You can come in like weird and get those little bits in it. So what I quite like, which I will definitely go on to. I appreciate this as me just going, I really like Shiver, which I know is quite nice to have.
I really appreciate it. It's lovely, thank you.
Good, I'm just recording. Yeah, you can get it as like a soundbite. Like, I really like Shiver, Fiona, what am I rolling? But what I think I like about it is that we do have this concept of horror film anthologies, horror film series. So you do talk about like what is that if there's a sequel to your games, and that idea that you've got the quick start adventure at the back, the corporate risers, and then you can like what happens once you do it, come back again. It's the same characters, but they're different, and you can have so the idea that there is playability. Like I said, it feels like it is a one-shot system, which is always great. That's something that I really love. But at the same time, if you really enjoy your characters, you can come back and again and again and again, put in the same world and expand on it. But then you could be still affected from those previous things and become the badass, weird person who suddenly, I have powers now because of what happened in episode 1, which, yeah, I just really enjoyed that as a way to develop and actually continue the story if someone really enjoyed that world.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, we're very big on kind of narrative change in characters in terms of kind of when you move through. I think like the system can be used for longer form plays. We know a lot of people basically playing stuff like Buffy or any of that kind of like Monster of the Week format, like people love, and Shiver seems to work really, really well for. It's kind of what I had in mind of like every week you're facing up against a new kind of monster. But the inspiration for kind of how characters changed across sequels comes from, well, my favorite horror films, Alien.
Yes.
Where in the first film, Ripley is fundamentally she's an engineer. It is her role. She's whip smart. She's fixing the ship. She's kind of dealing with the other people. And it's only in that pressure cooker of the alien getting on board and her kind of teammates slowly being kind of picked off one by one does she kind of emerge as this heroic badass, this final girl at the end of the film. And then when you kind of look at it in Aliens, in a way, she's completely changed archetype.
Agreed.
So if you applied it to Shiver, she kind of started out as a scholar and gained some elements. And by Alien, she's potentially a warrior or a survivor archetype, but from the beginning, because she, from pretty much straight away, she's strapping a flamethrower to a gun. It's great.
Yeah, it's so funny.
and that's what we kind of love to see with people is we've done games where like people have come back and but their characters have been 20 years older and they've completely changed who their archetype is. Like they've kind of said, like, in this 20-year gap, my character's gone through this, and now it's this person, which is just a really, really kind of like fun narrative way to approach it. And you get to see real character growth in both mechanics and kind of within the story as well.
So let's talk about the dice mechanic as well, because we've sort of alluded to it. So can you describe like what is the dice mechanic that is so unique to Shiver?
So Shiver uses a new dice mechanic called the archetype dice system. So it uses symbolic dice. It has two dice types. You have your core skill die and your talent die. It's a dice pool system. So every character has a specific dice pool for every kind of skill area. There are 6 core skill areas that are defined by each side of the dice, each side having a symbol for it. So you have grit, which is like your equivalent of like strength and kind of resisting damage. Wit, which is like your dexterity and kind of reaction time. Smarts, which is kind of how much of a boffin you are. Are you good with tech? Are you good at investigating things? You have hearts, which is kind of like charisma. Do you want to kind of talk your way out of it or intimidate people? Then we get into the slightly two stranger skills, which are luck. So luck is just generally how lucky you are and it determines anything that has any sense of like random probability. And then there's strange, which is any element that crosses the line of normality in the world tends to roll off strange, as well as resisting fear. That's where the kind of fear mechanic comes into it. So that's the D6. So it's a D6 covered with unique symbols on each side. And then you have the talent die as well. So the talent die, you only get these if you're really, really good at a particular core skill area. And this often kind of comes from the archetypes themselves. So if you're a warrior, you're really good at grit. So when you're rolling grit checks in your pool, you're going to get a talent die. With that, we've got a kind of 5-pointed star, which is your talent symbol, which is a universal success for everything apart from strange. Because the way that the D8s work is they're kind of a near 50-50 split between talent symbols and strange symbols, with some double symbols on there as well for some extra kind of rolling spice. So it's kind of really simple. You have a number for your core skill, a number for your talent, and you roll them all together. And what you're looking for is as many symbols that align with the thing that you're rolling for. So if I'm rolling grit, I'm looking for as many fists as possible, which is the symbol for grit. To hit something, kick down a door, use a weapon, anything, everything kind of roughly aligns to a core skill. And because they kind of have that flavor of like what they are, it makes it quite easy to, if you're unsure of like kind of what skill a check may be, if you're confused between the difference between intelligence and wisdom, for example. It's one that always got me when I was running D&D. They are smaller groupings that are kind of quite themey, so you'll always kind of know, and we put big guides in terms of like, these are the kind of checks you should be rolling for these. And yeah, that's the dice system in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, so succinctly as well, because it's one of those things where it may be a bit intimidating to people who are brand new to role-playing games, but as you said, with the ability trees, I think actually it is kind of straightforward when you just realize like, oh, you're just matching symbols and stuff, and you maybe just take a little while to do it. But going on from that, again, because you just put that so eloquently, the writing in the book, the way you sort of go about giving tips and stuff. So the first part of the book is mostly for players. It's like a primer about what Shiver is, and here are the archetypes and how to create character stuff. And then you have a whole, like nearly 100 pages dedicated to DM stuff, but it's all about advice on what to do, not just running the game, but in general about world building and safety tools and all that sort of thing. And I think it's been one of the most thorough but succinct ways of writing to it, because there are people that write on this subject quite a bit, but it just felt to me that it just felt so inviting for people who may be brand new to GMing or brand new to role-playing games in general. And I just was like, wow, that's such a wonderful way to have all these tips about, maybe it goes back to that whole thing you talked about, like, you went to university to do script writing and that sort of thing. It just felt like, okay, horror films, what are the tropes? What are the things? If you want to do short ones, here's ideas to do one-shots, but keep the threat here, all that sort of thing. Like, it felt very short, but really sound advice that I was like, oh, I don't think I've actually read that in a role-playing book before. So yeah, that's another big compliment to you, but I just thought the writing of it it's definitely one I'd recommend, just to like, oh, that section on world building, that section on like how to run combat, either turn-based or free flow, check these out, because it's just done in a couple of pages. It's not like reams and reams and reams.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, it's one of the things that I kind of set out with the DM side, Diadem's called the director. So that side of the book, I think I had a similar experience with game books, kind of looking around and throwing no shade at specific kind of systems or anything. There is sometimes a lack of explanation of this is how you use the system to do X. But for me, the thing with role playing is all about people gathering together, much like a campfire tale, to tell a story together. And one of the issues I was running into was that for new DMs, there wasn't that level of guidance. I wasn't really finding it of like, how do you take a free act structure and you apply it to a game, like to a role-playing game?
Exactly.
Which is what I put in the book, because it was something, again, taking that screenwriting training and being, how do I get this to work? Because for me, role-playing games are basically movies where you set up all the characters and the core threat and antagonists and protagonists with your players, but the script's not there. You improvise that together. But you need the structural framework, the beats that are there as someone who's running a game, who's designing your own stories, in order to get it to run at that pace, to mimic that cinematic feeling that you want. And I just wanted to share that and try and invite as many people to run their own games and tell their own stories as possible, because I think there's a real issue of that. People feel really intimidated about running these games. And honestly, I think as many people as possible who we can kind of get into the hobby and show them that it is not a intimidating thing to run these stories. You can create your own B movie about giant crabs and like write it and play it and it be an absolute hoot. And once it's like, without there being just this huge amount of work, you can really kind of play fast and loose with it and kind of really just like lean into the elements of kind of where you're strong and lean, and in my kind of opinion, where you're weaker in that, in terms of like, or where you kind of need to grow in terms of running games, that's where you lean on the system. But I think, I kind of wanted to open up a discussion about narrative in role-playing games, and I'm really glad. I think you're the first person who's mentioned that section of it, so that's made me very happy.
Yay! Exactly what you said, that whole thing of like, here's how you run this, and then quite a lot of RPGs, because they come with their own, like, here's the world we've already prepared for you, here's all the lore, which again is great because it's intimidating, but it's like there's always like a 2-bit saying, oh, you want to run it in your own world? I guess this. Whereas obviously from the outset, there is no setting, there's no something set. It is meant for you to create your own stuff. Although I do know that you've got obviously Gothic that's just coming out and stuff, which I only saw like 2 minutes before we I was like, oh, why didn't I hear about this earlier? Because it sounds so cool. So I'm definitely going to ask you about that in a second. But yeah, I just feel like one of the big parts about role-playing games is telling a good story. As you said, either it's the DM setting the world up, or it's everyone getting in together and talking about it. But just to reassure people, because you have the structure, but then you're like, I actually don't know how to write a story, and I don't know. You can use anything for inspiration, but just having someone just write down a few pages, here's some things to think about, and just encourage that. It's so important in that sense. But yes, obviously, Shiver came out. Whoa, as you can see, I'm reading loads of books now. So Shiver came out, and obviously you've had quite a few Kickstarters since then. I know we've got the current one that's about to be released and stuff, but you've done one called Shiver Gothic. I wondered if you could talk a bit about that for us.
So Shiver Gothic is our first foray into doing our own original setting for Shiver, which, although the system is kind of setting neutral, we wanted to have a framework to explore a larger story for the players and create a kind of rich world for them to explore, because not everybody wants to generate their own kind of big fantasy city to go run around in and punch vampires. Shiver Gothic is going to split into 2 books. Secret Spire Home is the main book, so it's twofold. So it has your player side, which introduced new monstrous archetypes. So this is kind of like heavily inspired by like the Hammer horror films, like the Universal monsters, kind of my first loves in horror. I write about that a lot in the foreword of that kind of Gothic horror, very much struck a chord with me in my teenage years, definitely. And I've never been able to shake it since. So it's this big walled city called Spirehome, where there's an unfolding kind of plot involving vampires and other monsters as the city is slowly getting more and more unstable, as you and your kind of group of players are trying to uncover what's going on. And you can do this as human characters that you can bring over from the core system, or you can do this as playing as monsters. So you can be playing like a vampire slayer 1 minute, or you can be playing as Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, the Mummy, Dr. Frankenstein themselves. Like you can go absolutely wild with it, and just full go in on kind of the gothic nature of things and just go absolutely wild with it. So yeah, it's been our first foray into long form storytelling. And with that, we thought we'd add extra mechanics as well. So how the Doom clock works for individual kind of sessions and one-shot sessions, we've now introduced the Doom calendar, which we're releasing blank templates for as well, so people can apply them to their own worlds. The way the Doom calendar works is it interacts with the Doom clock. So it's a 30-day calendar, which interacts with if you make poor decisions in the world, you let NPCs die, you let the Doom clock tick up wildly, days start to get crossed off on the calendar. And like any good calendar, it is filled with certain events that might particularly happen. But unlike the Doom clock, rather than a flash fire monster appearing and attacking you, the Doom calendar is more about affecting the world. So for Spirehome, the way that manifests is the city begins to degrade. Curfews are put in place. Ravenous ghouls start roaming the streets. You get plagues of rats running around. Certain districts become dangerous at certain times of the day. And all of these elements just kind of build to using Doom and that Doom generation to make your world feel alive, and that it is increasingly getting more dangerous over a long period of time. To help represent that, if you want to play a season of TV in a Gothic city, your Doom calendar is going to be really, really important.
Oh man, that I'm instantly, as soon as you said Doom calendar, I was like, yeah, I'm in. I'll because yeah, I just that idea that you are losing even more time, and I clockwise, absolutely, I definitely see that for, as you said, the sort of one shots and stuff. But yeah, over a long period, going, oh my god, we've already got a week left, and we've got rid of another day. How could you, that sort of thing. But also, again, I apologize very, very briefly, but like I saw again that you had this idea of obviously 4 big families as well, and this idea there's politics and stuff. And that for me, like again, it's all the elements of what I love. You got the horror, you got the monstrous side of it, but you also have political intrigue. There's this power play, and you're stuck in the middle. All that. When I was just sort of watching the Kickstarter video, I was like, damn, why did I not hear about this earlier? So I'm glad we're having this chat now to go, I'm going to sign up to the newsletter as soon as we finish this recording. But yeah, so yeah, you said that you've got Monstrous Archetype. I know you've got new dice coming out for that as well. And that seems really exciting. But you still have another Kickstarter happening, hopefully right now when this episode goes out. So can you tell us what this next Kickstarter is all about?
We do indeed. So this one's going live on October 11th from GameFound. So it's a Shiver double feature. So it's our own kind of drive-in kind of like movie double feature for you to explore 2 massive subgenres, because we realize that within our kind of audience, there are kind of 2 camps. There are people who are properly into their horror and people who are like kind of want to try out horror but are a bit unsure. It's a bit too intense. So we split it into 2. For our horror diehards, we've got Shiver Slasher, and the other half of our double feature is Shiver Blockbuster. So for me, looking at Shiver Blockbuster first, this is all inspired by Spielbergian cinema of like high peril. So like Jaws, Jurassic Park. There's a story in the book that's based off Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, where it's all about kids getting shrunk and having to fight giant ants. It's not necessarily what you would consider horror, but it has these horror elements within a grander kind of more adventure style story. I think it's kind of almost a coaching tool in our way of being like, horror's in everything, you just don't know.
Yes, it is.
It's like Jurassic Park, like the Velociraptors terrified me as a kid. And I absolutely kind of loved that film for having that little bit of terror, that little bit of peril. So that's Blockbuster, kind of like high adventure with large amounts of peril and kind of pepperings of horror. Slasher, on the other hand, is exploring one of the big major subgenres within horror in general and within Shiver. Of that, we've kind of touched on it in the core book already, but this expands further the elements of like having this singular antagonistic element, which you think, oh, it's just one enemy, we can deal with that, right? No, it's like we've aimed with this book to kind of make Slasher more dangerous. Slasher's way more dangerous, way more lethal, and kind of get that feeling like you're running away from Jason Voorhees around Camp Crystal Lake. That's kind of what we want with those. So with each one, in terms of how it's actually structured, this is also a great way for people to onboard onto the system as well. So we're doing starter sets for the first time. And we're not doing one, we're doing two different starter sets. So we're doing a starter set for slasher, and we're doing a starter set for blockbuster. So depending on like where you land in terms of the horror camps, there's an entry point for everybody, because we want everyone to kind of give the system a try. On top of that, we've done a hardcover book expansion for each of the subgenres as well. So we've got for slasher, Generation Murder, and for blockbuster, we've got The Legends of the Silver Scream. So The Legends of the Silver Scream is a vast kind of array of like your classic like blockbuster elements. So you've got ghost pirates, shrunken kids, all of those kind of like large kind of elements like giant creatures in the ocean, our stab at a fantasy one as well, which I'm very much looking forward to. The mechanical element that's added in there as well is what we call our Shiver's Road to Stardom. So to bring the horror element down, it's the idea that you're actually playing in movies and you have an actor who has a career. You're a returning kind of face who's embodying different characters, but they're being played by an actor who can win awards, which gives them certain boons when they're doing certain things, all whilst trying to uncover an actual mystery on the studio lot whilst you're filming these films. Is our kind of meta story within it. So it's a whole big bundle of Hollywood meta goodness is that book. So that's Legends of the Silver Scream. Generation Murder is very different. It has a element of kind of a film franchise to it, but it is a multi-generational story that all interconnects across different decades. And with this, the mechanical element that's being introduced there is what I call the inheritance system. So it's to deal with the fact that slashers are so lethal. The likelihood is someone in your group is probably going to die. But if you're playing interconnected stories, that can be a bit of a feel bad. But with the inheritance system, because each story jumps about a decade, it means that if you survive, you get older and things change. Your archetype can shift slightly. If you die, you can pick an inheritor, whether it be a daughter, a grandson, a relative, a cousin, a friend, and you can pass on some of your experience, an item from the previous story, as well as some inherited traumas from the previous game. So it's not all good. Yes, but it's this idea that with slashers, there is this element of, because their franchise has gone for so long, there is almost this element of inherited evil and trauma that kind of runs through them. And I mean, no kind of big spoilers here, but with Generation Murder, you have a prequel that starts in the 1920s or 30s. And then it runs from the 1950s all the way up to now. So kind of like looking at different decades. And our starter set covers one of the gaps. So the starter set is Return to Camp Blood, and that's in the 70s. So you've got your classic, like the birth of the slashers is kind of is right where our starter set lands.
That's so cool. Yeah, I love that idea of almost like a legacy type thing, these games. And just the thing that comes to my mind is Trivia Murder Party. That's the thing at the end. Yeah, so that no one really misses out. And it's not like it's not the end, but I love that there is consequences for dying. It's not all like, oh, get back in there. But what a cool way of thinking about it, because you're right. I feel like, I'm definitely in the slasher camp. I'm like, yes, give me more horror. But that's such a cool way to have those different mechanics, and it's no less a game at all. You're not missing out. So yeah, the blockbuster one, that sounds so interesting. And I can instantly see people, for me, I'd be like, oh, well, that's perfect for so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. So I'm like, what a cool way to do that with two different starter sets. That's so exciting. So I'm really excited by that.
But that's how we kind of feel, how I feel about it in terms of design with all of these expansions and all the future ones that we have planned, which I'm not allowed to talk about yet, because my brother will slap me on the wrist, as excited as I get. But all of these expansions, the idea is that they are modular. So it's, if you want to include the inheritance system in what you're doing, you can. If you want to include the Road to Stardom to what you're doing, you can. If you want the Doom calendar, you can do that as well. So once kind of Gothic's released, you could take the Doom calendar and fuse that with the inheritance system and run a campaign that's in medieval England, say, which is all about peasants and like lords and ladies and stuff and getting killed off by horrors and passing down their responsibilities. It doesn't have to be just slasher. Slashers in that sense, we've tried to build everything so it can still apply to that any setting, anywhere, players, anyone ethos, which is kind of Shiver's underpinning. So that's what we really hope people do. We're really excited to see what people do with the slasher books, but also what happens when they extract those modular elements and clip them onto something else.
Yeah, I like that idea of encouraging people to go away and take what they've been given and just run with it. It's for me, that's such the heart of like home brewing and role playing in general. So that's amazing. What was the biggest sort of challenge you found creating Shiver, if there was one? You might not have had one.
Well, so first up, time.
Always.
I'm saying the initial
We're
one.
all time poor, yeah.
Because now it's allowed me to actually go full time now on it, which has been so exciting.
Yeah.
But it's been a long journey. I think for me, one of the biggest challenges was balancing what I felt the kind of player base for the game once it was released would expect. I mean, we've just kind of talked heavily about kind of death. Death was a big one. We went back and forth. Me and my brother in particular, my brother acted as like kind of the editor and developer and helping kind of balance rules with me. And one of the issues I was quite worried about is that in other games, like people are so precious about their characters. They're really terrified of them dying and losing them and losing all of that progression. And the biggest challenge for us was trying to figure out how do you ingrain a feeling that characters aren't disposable, but if they die, it can be satisfying. It can be for a narrative reason. It can have interesting consequences.
Yes.
So for that, one of the ways that we overcame that challenge, you introduced 2 modes. So you've got survive mode, you've got nightmare mode. Nightmare mode, if you play nightmare mode, people are going to die. I'll just throw out there as a designer, I've played nightmare mode before. It's joyously rough. I love it. It's very close. It's very much more close to like playing survival horror on a hard difficulty, where they basically just give you like 2 bullets. It's like that, which I enjoy at times. Sure. But if you want to kind of have a higher rate of survival, then survival mode is there as well. The other element was giving fun things that can happen when players die. Because I think if you're dead and you're then it's like hand in your character sheet, your game is over. That's kind of a bit of a bummer. But with this, it's like you could have a really satisfying death, but then you could come back as a ghost and start haunting the players. If, they were good to you as a character, you might try and help them. If somebody murdered you within the party, you might try and push a bookcase on them or something. It's like the options are open to you. And there's on that antagonistic front as well. It's like if you're killed by a werewolf or a vampire, then you come as a vampire in a combat and the director could let you control them. Like there's a long list of kind of like suggestions. We do say like have some other characters to the side ready if you want to jump back in. But we've had like various things like, so one of our friends in our playtest group ran their version from Dusk Till Dawn from a different perspective. So people in a cafe where the Gecko brothers like kind of hold it up. So we were all the people in the cafe, and my brother's character got killed instantly, became a ghost, and his ghost possessed his dog, and he played as a dog for the rest of the game. And I think he maintains that is one of the best and fun, like most fun times he's had playing a role gaming game is when he just had to lassie it for a tale about vampires. And I think that's it. Death is fun. I think that's the thing. It's like death can be satisfying, and I think death shouldn't be feared, as strange as that sounds. Because for me, playing a character, and particularly certain characters in horror movies, there is almost a prophetic element to story structure that kind of demands that you die. So in a way, it kind of makes it more satisfying when you do die. Like our biggest example in terms of how we design them as well is Benny from The Mummy. If you know like the 90s Mummy, he inspired the cockroach path on The Survivor, which is all about actually slightly more antagonistic play with other players and pretending to be dead and avoiding stuff. But when those characters, you get to that third act element and they get their comeuppance, they get theirs. It's so, it's so satisfying. And from testing it with people who kind of like to like write films and kind of do all of that stuff, they always play those kind of characters, and it always and it's almost like they are hurling themselves towards scenes where they know they are going to perish in a way that's fun, and that brings me an immense amount of joy. Is that people finding the fun, the humor, and the narrative satisfaction that the death of a character can bring, rather than the fear of losing that character forever.
That's so true. Like it is that sort of, like you said, that preciousness you put in all this time and effort, and then it's taken away from you. And then, like you said, in other games, it's like, we'll have a break. I will have to figure it out. But like you said, you've got those suggestions about what to do. So instantly it's like, okay, we can pick this up and you get a fun thing to do for the rest of the session. And then we can talk it out. And yeah, I think that's so important. And yeah, the 2 modes as well. When I saw that, I was like, I don't know any other game that does that. And instantly I was like, I don't know what I'd do with Nightmare mode. I don't know. It sounds scary. But yeah, I like that you have that option to do that. So you could play the hardcore mode on like The Quarry or Until Dawn, all that sort of thing, and just see what happens from there. My next question then is almost like the flip side of it. What was the most fun part when you were sort of creating Shiver, if there was one? I know the whole process of like, I now have a book, I have my RPGs out in the world. That's always fun. But just in general, was there anything that you were like, this is amazing?
I do think it's kind of a twofold thing of writing the archetypes of when they were nailed and they worked in any setting and we ran kind of tests on them.
Mm-hmm.
That was so enjoyable and satisfying. Of when I remember the day when we kind of finished the trees, and it was we had little like cue cards and we pinned it all up on the wall to make sure that it worked and things. And the way that we tested it kind of initially, and I think that still makes me giddy thinking about it, is we would just like almost play names in a hat with pop culture characters that we liked from various films. So we were like, I want to play Sherlock Holmes. And then we'd like look at the trees and be like, so if I did this, and this, yep, that feels like Sherlock Holmes. Or I want to play Benny from The Mummy. I want to play Eleven from Stranger Things. That was one that came, and we were just like, yep. And just like kind of just going until we ran out, and just being like, okay, I feel confident now that I can release this to people. And be like, and that was just really, really satisfying. And also it was just a lot of fun. I think that was the thing I realized, is we wanted character creation to be fast, but also just really, really fun, because we had a lot of fun coming up with backgrounds, as you can probably see. And there's going to be more in Gothic as well, because we're big on just more options. Just go wild, make your crazy like chimney sweep urchin that's got telepathic powers. It's like, we want to see it.
Bert, what are you doing? Exactly. My sort of penultimate question to you, I think you mentioned it briefly, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So obviously you've got the Kickstarter coming out, you've got double feature, it's all very exciting. Are there any more plans that you can talk about or refer to for Shiver, or are there any other games you're thinking of doing, or is it just like, it's too far in the future, we've got this Kickstarter, don't ask me anything else?
Okay, so we've got at least the next 3 to 5 years of Shiver releases planned vaguely, like we're in various levels of detail, so we know exactly what the next year's release is going to be. But in terms of other systems, I can confirm there are other systems that we've designed under Parable. We're exploring a solo RPG that I've designed as well, which I can't talk about yet.
That sounds amazing though. Let me know when that comes out.
I will indeed, because it's my kind of forced friend to it, and I'm finding it really, really interesting, really, really fun. So Shiver is going to be our main supported system. That's the goal. Absolutely. And we've got kind of 3 to 5 years of that already planned. We know kind of each year what the releases are going to be. And various other games and systems in the works. It's just the matter. At the moment, we're kind of struggling with landing on, when do we release this? Like, when do we actually do this? Because we just got... I think that's the thing. It's making this stuff get so intoxicating, because... seeing people's reactions and people playing with it just makes me really excited. I get really excited. I go away and write some more stuff. And then it's just a never-ending loop of that, really.
And as well, I mean, we've gone through this whole interview without mentioning, obviously, the amazing artwork that your illustrator has done, Ben. And it's so eye-catching, this sort of the ink and pen look of it, that obviously you have your own art book with it as well. And so not only is Shiver distinctive in the sense of the dice system, the writing, and like you said, these different editions, which sound incredible, but also it looks great, which is amazing. And like, I love how you've got, the upgrades for the books as well. And like, I was like, I hope you do posters soon, because I really would really like a nice big poster of the artwork. We do have Rhizoprint posters, but they're usually at cons. Is the thing at the moment. But I think we're going to be doing more of that stuff as well. Ben's amazing. He's absolutely kind of incredible to work with, and we discovered Ben when so he works with my brother's partner, or did, and now he works with us full time. And he came to one of our playtests, so he's a big RPG nut. And it was in the Dusk Till Dawn playtest, funny enough, actually, where he was playing kind of a warrior, Tom of Finland style biker, who was just fighting. And he drew his character
And we kind of saw it, and kind of we knew that he kind of did illustration. And he offered at the end of the thing to, oh, can I do something that will kind of doodles for Shiver and stuff? Like, oh, that'd be great. And then we got those, they were great. And then we started being like, actually, imagine if the whole book was consistent and looked like this. And then we sat down, had a discussion, and started, as you can see in the art book, like kind of hashing out what that art style was going to be, like kind of what level of detail. And it was so much fun of just kind of discovering that style together. Kind of, we hope, like, can evoke so many different time periods, because that was the big challenge there.
Exactly.
Was something that kind of felt like it could be of any era. But I think Ben's nailed it. He's knocked it out of the park, and he's just finishing up all the Gothic illustrations at the minute, which look amazing. And I'm very excited. I'm so excited to share that book with you.
The cover for both of those books, if you look onto the Kickstarter, they're still up there, and I'm just like, damn, I want those as physical books, just to be able to, like, oh, these just so happen to be like works of art, so, you know, just put that everywhere. If somebody was picking up Shiver for the first time and was like really excited and they want to be the director, what's your sort of big tip or main bit of advice that's not already in the book, because I know there's lots of advice in the book, but what was it you would say to this person for their first game of Shiver? In terms of the first game of kind of running it, I would say have a look at the movies and the pop culture that you love. Pick the one that you're most passionate about and see if you can run that with some minor tweaks and changes. If you love Jurassic Park, give it a whirl. Like, have a blast of it. If you love slashers, give that a go. Because I'm very much of the opinion that the thing you are most passionate about and the thing you love the most, you are going to find it much easier to pull on threads and references on the fly to kind of give your players that particular experience. So yeah, identify what corner in the broad church of horror that you love and run with it full sail. Just have a laugh with it. And also, like, don't put your pressure on yourself in terms of like performance for character voices. What was I reading recently? I think it might be Grant Howitt who said it in Hearts. That's it. Hearts is beneath. The level of performance that you need is of kind of like professional wrestling level. If you think about that and that kind of like building your characters, that's perfect. I really kind of like vibed with that. I think that's an amazing way to approach it. So yeah, pick your favorite horror movie, get your luchador mask on, and just like kind of like go ham with it. Like really lean into the B movie energy. Is that a lot of B movies aren't particularly amazing in terms of like performance or production design, but that to me is what makes it so charming. In a way, that's kind of what role playing is to me. It's these fantastic B movie productions that are being improvised by everybody at the table. So lean into that energy. It's such a great bit of advice from Heart, that this, because it came upon a Shut Up and Sit Down video quite recently with their RPG things, and I was like, what a great thing. So yeah, I need to write that and put that like somewhere when I'm DMing. Charlie, thank you so much. My final question is like the Columbo one more thing. Where can we get Shiver? Where can we find out about the new Kickstarter? And where can we find out more about Parable Games online? So you can find us across all social media. So you can find us at Shiver RPG on Instagram, Shiver RPG on Facebook, at Games Parable on Twitter. In terms of where you can find the game, the full core system, Curse Library and Dice are all available through our website, our Facebook store, but also at parablegames.com. That can be kind of bought as well. But if you do have like friendly local gaming stores, if you ask there, we are about 3 months ago, we started distributing everything to stores. So you can buy it in stores as well if you'd like to kind of pick up your book and see if there are any people playing at the stores as well. If they don't have it in stock and you'd like to buy it from your friendly local game store, just ask, because we want to try and get it in as many stores as possible as well. But yes, our main website, parablegames.com, has all the links that you need in terms to get the game. Brilliant. Oh, thank you so much, Charlie. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Oh, thank you. You too. I'm hoping to do more of these special Q&A bonus episodes in future, including Q&As on the one-shots we've run here at What Am I Rolling? If you have a question or think of an RPG designer you'd like to see interviewed on this podcast, let us know. Our email address is whatamirollingpodcast@gmail.com. And that's it. Great. See you next time.